I'm with Pfizer Medical Information, did all the great things that, that Donna shared. So I'm going to walk you, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be preaching to the choir here, and it sounds like and I know that George used that analogy earlier, but I had that in my mind as well. But it sounds like not everyone here are necessarily Auth0 users, and we're not yet either. But we're in the process. We've started the process, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through kind of the thought processes and what we went through to get where we are now, and tell you exactly where we are now at the end. And then Murali is going to, I think, give you a little bit more about Auth0 and how it works, and maybe some screen grabs of the system. So the main reason we started this, and this was alluded to earlier as well, the mainstay of our system, and I don't know that everybody's necessarily medical information, but everybody here is in pharma, so the mainstay of our existence is the standard response letter or standard response document. That's what we use to respond to customer requests, whether when they're on the phone, is what we use to mail out to customers so they have access to the content, and is what we post on our websites. Currently, the process of maintaining those documents is labor intensive, and our outputs are not optimized for digital channels that are becoming more and more prominent. The content authoring part was cumbersome, and localizing that content. So we do have we don't have a dedicated global group, but we have local users that work on global teams to create content that will be used globally. And then there's the process, so we create that content, and then it's another entire process for folks to, on the local level, to kind of customize those to put the local labeling information, et cetera. So that process of them kind of getting that global content and then making it local and then updating it when the global content is updated was very cumbersome. We weren't reusing content in an efficient manner, and again, anytime we had to update content, it was a manual process. The content search in the system that we use, and this also was alluded to earlier by Tracy, finding the content, unless it was your collection and you knew exactly, in what letter this piece of content was, it was very difficult to find content. And the search in the system that we had now, was very cumbersome. And reuse was a manual process. It was copying and pasting. And then we went to content delivery. Content delivery, we had Word and PDF. So in what's accessible to our frontline contact center folks were Word documents, and then what we deployed to our websites were PDFs. If somebody's using a smartphone, good luck. You're sitting there blowing it up, scrolling it out, and so it wasn't, the user experience was not optimal. That was our landscape. Those were the challenges that we were trying to address when we were looking at other options for authoring content. In our conversations, we heard a lot about different component authoring tools, and what our expectation is of this is that we're going to have our individual pieces of content. We'll have our labeling information. We'll have our disclaimers, our references, and then we'll be able to piece them all together, creating our SRD, essentially as it exists today. IRMS-CM, that's the document management system that we use today, so we're still going to use that to store our Word documents. So from Auth0, we'll have all of our components. They'll be pieced together, and they'll then be stored in our document management system, which made it easier because then that document management system feeds the front line. Front line can access content directly there, and it also feeds other downstream applications, such as websites. And this kind of illustrates what I just said. So our electronic file format, initially, we're still in the same space. So, we are still just outputting Word and PDF. So people are still going to have to be pinching and widening for a while. But we do, and this comes up in a future slide, we do expect that to change at some point. And we'll also, continue to publish to our global websites. So this is an illustration of what we're expecting and what we're seeing already, right? So today, this is what we have. We have content. It says unstructured, but obviously we do have an outline and a process that we follow. But it's a Word document, and you put it in whatever sequence you want to organize it. In the future, with component authoring, we're going to have each of these pieces will be a separate topic or a separate component. So we might have our summary separate, our labeling information separate, disclaimers, some other body text. I don't think it would be called body text. It'd be better named to be able to make it more discoverable. Our citations would be separate. Tables are all separate. And then the outputs are it's more flexible, right? So, you see this which one is it? This one in the lower right is probably like what our letters look like today. So we'll still be able to piece our letters together, making them look very similar to what they do today. But then what we're expecting is, on the left-hand side, some of these, similar to what you do when you search Wikipedia. So if you search Wikipedia, if you're on your computer, you can scroll down the whole entry of whatever it served up. If you're on your phone, you get these cool little tabs on the side, and it blows up the content. Instead of having to have our external users kind of pinching up a PDF to magnify it. Then when it comes to updating content, you update that content once, right? So we've used, for example, in this scenario, it was our labeling information. We've used it in, let's say, 3 different letters. That component is authored once and then used in each of these SRDs. When we need to update it, then we just go in and we update the content in that one location, and then we push it out and can publish it to all the other locations that it's used. There's other functionality there. I think Marily might go through more as far as notifying the user if you're not the owner of the content, notifying the owner of the content that this piece was updated. And then there's an option as to whether you can update other people's content. I think the way we're going right now is we are going to enable people to update the content of another owner's SRD that's using a piece of content that you're owning. I'll repeat that because I don't know if that was, as I finished it, I'm like, wait a minute, that didn't calculate. So I think there's a couple of ways the system can work. So you can update, so when I author a piece of content, other people can use my piece of content. So let's say, for example, this letter is mine, and this letter is mine, and this letter is Morley's. When Morley put together this letter, he used one of my pieces of content. When I go and update this piece of content, I can automatically update my 2 letters, and I can either just let Morley know that this piece of content that's in his letter has been updated, or I can push it forward and update his letter. I think the way that we're going to go, the way we're thinking right now, is we are going to allow people to update other people's letters. So I will be able to update my content. Morley used it. I'm just going to update his letter. And he'll still get a notice, and he can go in and look to see if he agrees with what I did. And he'll be able to track, there's track changes. Morley will go through all the details of the system, but there's a way to see exactly what was changed as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. It's very similar to the first one, and I think you're going to have access to all the slides as well. So what was the problem we were facing, and what are the opportunities with the component authoring system, with AuthorIt specifically? So again, our challenges were around localization, the lack of reuse of content and updates to individual packaging information or global content. And again, with the opportunity with AuthorIt, we're able to share content. The citations and references, we're entering them once, and they can use, if you're using a specific reference in multiple SRDs, you're not retyping it every time. You're not even copying and pasting it every time. You're just selecting them. And then I think the delivery formats is another one that we're looking to reap benefits from in the future, where we're looking forward to having our content better presented on different digital media. And then the content search we've seen already, that it's a lot easier to find content that's in the system. So what process did we go through? We spoke to, and I wasn't involved in the initial phases of the project. We have Ron and Arvind in the audience who were involved early on. But we spoke to a lot of you. We definitely spoke in great length to our colleagues at BMS, who were using the system already, and colleagues in quite a few other companies as well. And at the end, we narrowed, and we had another company that was familiar with the space that was helping us kind of look at all the different vendors. We narrowed it down to 3 suppliers. This mentions that we had an external vendor helping us to develop a blueprint for implementing the system. Sent the RFP out to the 3 suppliers, and ultimately, and obviously I'm standing on this stage, so obviously we chose Authorent. So I had already given these slides to Maureen, but George hates me still using the word pilot, and actually our head of medical information recently said maybe we should stop using the word pilot. But I'll explain. But I'll explain to you why we're well. It probably won't be here the next time I present this. But the reason, because we've invested a fair amount of money into this, and the core team that worked on it is very confident that this is the solution that we're going to implement and that it's going to work well for us. However, we are implementing it with a small group, not a small group. So the way we're choosing to implement it is going to be a global implementation to start, but for one therapeutic area. So it's only for a quarter of our content. And then what we wanted to do was to look at metrics from the system, which Tom is going to be working with us on. So metrics from the system and how people are using it and how much content we're reusing, as well as the user experience. So hearing from our users, is this making it significantly more difficult to get things done? That's one of our taglines at Pfizer today, is make it easier to get things done. In a big corporation, it's often not easy to get things done. But that's one of our taglines, one of our mantras, and we want to see, are we making it easier for people to get this work done? And if it's not making it easier, is the other advantages of the system sufficient that it outweighs that it's a little bit more difficult for some colleagues to work? So our phase 1 is SRDs only. So we do have a couple of different content types. We do manage PowerPoint presentations. We have some FAQs and Q&As in some markets. But we're really tackling the SRD. It's the mainstay of our work, and so we're limiting it to the SRD for a specific therapeutic area, but globally, because we really felt, and we never had an implementation in this way. Normally, we'd take a small collection of countries, but we thought this was the best approach here because what we wanted to do is see if we could leverage those synergies from global content and across countries. Publishing, initially we're just publishing Word documents. They're going into our existing content management system. In the future, we expect HTML for websites. And at one point we were doing something different for Japan. I don't think that's happening anymore. And then in the future, we'll determine what our next step is. From the output that we get from the users and from the system, we'll determine whether we kind of tack on another therapeutic area or whether we just go in whole hog. So we've done the requirements gathering, the document that Tracy referred to earlier. We've had that sit down. We worked with Authorent to develop the prototype. We had one in person, so we had a core team, which was actually across therapeutic areas, but definitely a global team. And we did bring them all into New York one time to help ensure that Authorent fully understood our use case and exposed the team to the system. We're currently working on integrating with our existing document management system that proved a little bit more challenging than we'd initially expected, and it's because we have a quarter of our content one way and 3/4 the other way. And I think that one of our major hurdles there was around the references, because they both use different referencing tools. The delay that was caused by the difficulty integrating the system was fortuitous, I guess, because we reconsidered the migration plan, and now we're working with Author to actually migrate. Our initial plan was to just migrate the global content over into Author, and then have users from the global content and grabbing stuff from the old content management system create all of their local content. What we're doing instead is we're bringing everything in. We're bringing all of the global and local content into the system. It'll be componentized, and then from that point, people are just working steadily in that system. So then we move over to Morley. I can maybe try for a few questions now if anybody has anything for me. And yes? So the question was, did we find it necessary to put in place a new information architecture, or did we already have something in place? And when you say that, do you mean from a technology perspective, or do you mean from the content perspective? So for the technology part, I'm going to refer to the fellas behind you, but I'll start with the content. In the way we name content, so we do have a standard way that we compile our SRDs, and we have a standard nomenclature to make it clear as to what that SRD is addressing, and we also have metadata. So through those three, the nomenclature, how we're naming the content, and some of the metadata, that's how we're addressing, from the content perspective, knowing how to find information. But the system also has a pretty robust full text search of all the content. So retrieving information has not been a challenge so far in the testing that we've been doing.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I'm not going to do a demo as Mike suggested. That's Steve. Steve will be presenting something tomorrow morning around the product itself. What I really want to cover today is basically three things. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what we do, what Author is about. Secondly, touch upon some facts in terms of how we implement an Author solution at a client such as Michael's and at BMS, so to speak. Also to share some lessons learned in terms of change management and adoption as we implement those solutions at BMS and Pfizer, so to speak. So my role, as Maureen mentioned, is I'm an engagement manager. I'm responsible for project delivery at various places, so to speak, and I bring in that knowledge in terms of how to structure this project along a successful path to discovery, analysis, and then successful delivery, so to speak. One of the recurring themes that you'll hear today is basically about content, right? We talked about data being unstructured. We talked about data being in siloed infrastructure. And we also talked about data being very complex to deal with, right? And as Tracy and George were mentioning earlier this day, when you're 25% of your cost to produce a drug is associated to documentation and creating these document components, that's a challenge that really we need to take on head on, right? So what is the solution? So solution for us is a competent authoring or a competent approach to document authoring, so to speak, right? Which we achieve by using Author as such. And we know this approach works is because we bring that experience from different industries. As you may or may not be aware, Author really started its genesis in the high-tech industry, in the technical publications industry. For the last 15 years, we've been providing services to those industries exactly with this solution, right? So we have some metrics to share from that perspective, from that expertise that we bring in. There are a couple of case studies that I would like to go through. I don't want to go through the details of the slide, but the key takeaway is that as your organization starts approaching the content creation through a component view and takes that through to implementation, there are significant reuse opportunities and reuse advantages that directly impact your efficiencies in the authoring piece, the reviewing of that authoring of that content, as well as distribution of that content to various multiple outputs like websites and PDFs and so on and so forth to different consumers. What we have found from these exercises, these case studies, is that there is a significant reduction, almost more than 50% reduction in the authoring effort. That includes new and existing content. More than 50% reduction in localization effort. This is basically getting things translated and ingested and being distributed out. And as I suggested, as the solution progresses, as a component architecture evolves and is implemented through, there is a direct impact into the efficiencies that you bring about in authoring, reviewing, and distributing that content, which obviously translates to productivity gains. The same paradigm that we see in the high-tech industry, we brought it to pharma. And as you can see in this slide, right from preclinical to clinical through commercialization, there are opportunities for reuse, right? So reuse in the upstream processes, let's say, for example, in preclinical, if implemented correctly, can be translated and realized in downstream as well, in the downstream benefits as well. So this really means that as you start implementing your solution, as you approach towards a component architecture, some of these benefits across verticals can be realized and can be utilized and can be delivered to the end users very effectively, right? Now, this is a daunting task, right? You're looking at multiple verticals, and you're looking at multiple areas of inflection, so to speak. And obviously, we're not asking you to address them cumulatively, right? The best approach, as we did with many of your clients, is to identify that one segment of information, one segment of one vertical, so to speak, and then strategize around how to componentize the document, how to componentize the content within that vertical. And as those strategies become much more effective and much more prudent, and as you realize those successes because of those componentization, you would move those and leverage those efficiencies to other verticals as well. So again, Mike mentioned that we worked with his team. We worked with him to identify that particular vertical, and that particular vertical being identification of component reuse in a standard response document. Standard response document is a very good example because it's one document type that you're working with, right? It's a very focused, well-defined scope per se. And what that allows you to do is that within that well-defined scope, you're able to now strategize and optimize your authoring, reviewing, and distribution process to a very fine point. And then as you realize success in that activity, you can leverage those findings and leverage those lessons learned to other aspects as well. What is the solution? I'm going to talk briefly about Author It per se. Many of you are aware of what we do, but generally speaking, we are a single platform where you can author, create, manage, and distribute content from, right? So what that means is you have a single platform where your medical authors or authors per se can go in, make sure that the content is available, they can massage that document, they can send it through review approval process, and once that is done, you can publish that out to multi-channel, right, through PowerPoints to PDFs or so have you. The important thing that we do here that sets us apart is that we store components or chunks of data at the relational database level, at the database level. And not only the content, what we also store is the relationship between these contents. And that's very powerful, right? Once you have the content and the relationship between the components in a database, it's very easy to report. All the compliance guys are happy because you can produce reports and as well as give lineage of where that component started its journey and how it transformed through its journey, through its life cycle. So that is something that we do inherently within the product. The other thing that Tracy also spoke about today is the UI aspect, the UX aspect of it, right? As we find from different industries, this is one single point of attention that people need in the sense that a good UI has direct impact to the output that is being generated, right? So a good UI is what? A good UI is availability of the content, findability of the content, something that is very easy to look up. something that can be looked up, found, and acted upon. And then once this is acted upon, there is a way to publish it out into multi-channels, I suppose. And this is one of the central themes with which we have developed the product. And Steve is going to talk about it tomorrow in his presentation as well. Right? So ease of use, findability, reportability, and traceability of components within an enterprise system is the cornerstone of what we do and what we provide to you as such. The only thing I want to highlight in this slide is, again, ease of use. But ease of use, as someone was mentioning earlier, as you start your component authoring journey, you're bound to author things in a much more granular fashion than you're used to, right? And thereabouts, the ease of use with regards to UI, with regards to reportability and findability become very important. And that's precisely why some of the XML tools did not do well, because in addition to XML tagging that somebody was supposed to do, you are also now bound to make, or you're supposed to author the component as well, which is very burdensome to the end user. So ease of use, findability, portability, traceability, all of those things are something that we focus on inherently, and it's built into the platform as such. So how do you start with the solution? So typically, when your organization has decided to go through the component authoring way, once you've made that decision, then we set into motion a few things in terms of engaging with you, right? And this is probably, Marianne, to your question before, is how do we create that information architecture, right? How do you know that as you granularize data, how do you know how that transforms into the system? And there is a technical aspect to it, and there is a content aspect to it, right? So Tom Erber and Jim are going to talk about this a bit more detail in a breakout session later on. But generally what we do is we do a content analysis, right? And what the content analysis does is basically tells you what your reuse capability is, right? It tells you, among the data set that we are analyzing, how many documents have near similar or similar data within it. It will go a step further and also tell you, among that data, what is the reuse potential? How much of it can be deduplicated, which means that it's only reused once and not really duplicated again and again. It also tells you what kind of workflows and processes it needs to support from translating that into a physical document into an authored system, so to speak. So more about that in Tom. And I'm just being reminded that I have 2 minutes, so I'll skip through some of them. One of the other things that Tom is going to talk about is how we provide the analytics, and this is all evidence-based. So this basically means that this is your data. This is not something that we are not creating on the fly, so to speak. So this is real evidence-based data that you can look at and make an informed decision in terms of what is a snapshot now versus how it's going to be transformed later on, how it will look in the authored system per se. The last thing I want to talk about is just a few change management lessons learned. As you traverse from your regular authoring paradigm to a component authoring paradigm, there are certain key success criteria that you have to look through, right? So we talked about ease of use. The other thing that we typically recommend is also to phase your projects in manageable bits. Mike kind of mentioned that earlier today. So we looked at one vertical, which is the standard response document. We looked at how to optimize it, how to really rework it, how to componentize it, and then how to derive success around some key metrics that we defined earlier on. So that is key because change can be burdensome. So we want to make sure that it is we have the processes in place to make sure that transition becomes much more smoother. And the last thing that I want to talk about is, again, from a change perspective, we want to make sure that we have adequate representation from local and global authors because we need to listen to them first. And we actually, from a process perspective, when we go out and talk to you guys, we will bring them in, make sure that we understand their requirement, we hear their voices, so to speak, because that's very important, because that's one of the areas where there's a big disconnect sometimes. Mike also mentioned setting up a core team. So the core team is very essential. It helps you expedite decision-making very rapidly. And also it provides us that single point of contact that we really require when there is a rollout that is global in nature, so to speak. Content analysis, we already spoke about. Content analysis piece is very, very critical because it gives you a look forward into how your system will look like based upon evidence available today. And that is very critical from a migration perspective as well as from understanding your content itself, because your content authoring paradigm in the regular, in your regular day-to-day work is going to be very different from, or rather will be a little bit different from how it's going to look in the authored world, so to speak. All right, so I think I'm out of time. Are there any questions that I can answer?
I saw you had UAT testing. Are any of
Yes.
your customers formally validating this?
Yes. Mike, I mean, I can address it, but yeah.
So yes, we are. We have a structured UAT process. We have scripts. We run through the different scenarios and validate if the solution is meeting the requirements. And also, I think we, apart from just the UAT piece as well, we also have our system testing as well.
Correct.
So when we integrate with systems, we understand the impact of how the components are flowing through. Does it impact performance and things like that?
Right.
So we do validate all those.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, one thing I need to mention is this is not a validated system in our use case in Pfizer specifically, because the nature of the content. So we had a process where we went through does it answer? We have a questionnaire, like we go through it, and does it answer some questions? And based on those answers, we decide if it's a validated system or not. So in our scenario, it is not, but it might be different
Right.
in different clients.
A lot of it depends upon where your approved content sits, right? So typically in our implementations, we provide the approved content to the DMS where the validated system resides, so to speak.
On one of your slides, you had translate it into any language. Could you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, I think maybe Tom or Susie.
Yeah, there are a couple of ways that translation can happen in Author It. One way is that you might have in-house translators and they can work directly in the system. Another way is that you can package up all of the content, send it out of the system downstream to either your language service provider or some outsourced translation resource. That's actually something that I'm going to be speaking to tomorrow in my presentation. So,
Correct.
Can you elaborate on the content analysis, how it works? Is it manual? Is it some kind of automated analytics tools you're utilizing? How does it work?
So we actually have a breakout meeting to go over that right after lunch, and if you want to come to that, we'll get into detail. But yes, we have an analytical tool that comes in. We break down as much content as we can. Right, the more we have, more spread. The better we get input on what on the information that we get from it. So.
Right.
So yes, but we'll break that down in a breakout session. So if you want to participate, that would be great.
Thank you. So it looks like I successfully delegated everything.